We are breaking down our top 36 overall rankings in Superflex formats, tier by tier, player by player, and talking about the values of these players on the open market. We're going to do this in a similar way to what we did for the rookies. Now that the NFL draft has happened and we have all these things that have shaken up the landing spots and some of the player values of the dynasty market, we're going to start by talking about overall Superflex rankings in a top 36 tier-based format in this video. And then in the coming days, we're going to go position by position and break down the changes around quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end as well. So we will also have a trade value chart dropping on Flock Fantasy this week. So make sure you're signed up over there. Of course, use the promo code FSE for 2 days and a 30% off discount. But with that being said, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, we've been talking about rookies ad nauseum these last couple of months. It's finally nice to just open up and talk about the landscape as a whole. And I mean, that doesn't preclude the rookies from being involved in this video, because as you guys will see, some of those top high-end rookies that you guys tanked for are going to be a part of this list, are going to be a part of the top 36, which they will be moving forward. You will see the landscape of this top 36 is based around youth, is based around value appreciation, is based around how these assets can hold their value going into the season. But I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. If you guys enjoy it, as always, make sure you leave a like down below, and let's get right into it.
All right, so we are now into the top 36. There's a lot going on here. So let me just describe what's happening here. On the side, you guys can see the tiers that we value these players in. You see that, Mahomes and Allen, for example, are valued as 4 first rounders plus, then 4 first rounders, 3 plus first rounders, etc. Basically, what we're doing here is, instead of saying that these are the S tier or the A tier, whatever, we're listing what their market value is, or at least what they should be worth on the open market when it comes to trades. Ergo, if you were to trade away Mahomes, you would want to acquire 4 plus first rounders, probably even more, because of how valuable he is, so on and so forth as we go down the list. So let's start with the first tier, Mahomes and Allen. You guys know how good these players are. I don't think we're breaking any news saying how good they are. Obviously, in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues especially, they're going to be extremely, extremely valuable because of what they provide. Mahomes with his arm, Allen with a combination of his arm and his legs. Those two guys, 101 and 102 in Superflex formats for us.
Yeah, and as you'll see in a second, the only real difference I have, not from a player standpoint in terms of the tiers, I just have that top tier listed as 5 first rounders, 4 first rounders plus, etc., going down from there, and you'll see why in a second.
Yeah, so the rankings that you guys can see on the screen right now are my rankings, and we'll swap from Danny's rankings to my rankings, and we'll make sure that we're outlining when we're doing that. The next tier down, of course, is still highly valuable quarterbacks. You guys are probably going to see a theme in our top 36 is that quarterbacks are extremely valuable in most of the rooms that we are drafting in. That could differ with the audience that you guys are drafting in. If you are playing traditionally redraft 1 quarterback leagues, quarterbacks probably won't go as highly as we have them listed here, but this is what we believe they are worth. And just a step down from Mahomes and Allen is Jalen Hurts and Joe Burrow, both guys that you should expect to get 4 first rounders in a trade for as well, because they're also extremely young, highly value insulated. And of course, they are going to provide high-end fantasy production as well. And I don't even think it's irrational to argue either of those guys in the first tier with Mahomes and Allen, depending on the scoring format, especially if you're in a 4-point per passing touchdown for Hurts' sake.
Yep. No, I agree there. Next year, we have the same 3 players as well. We have Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, and Lamar Jackson. The only order switch, if you will, is that I have Lamar behind Trevor Lawrence. You have Lamar before Trevor Lawrence. Doesn't really matter in terms of the semantics. These are all franchise-level quarterbacks, all in the right situation. All of them are young players that are going to be staples of your dynasty team for the next 10 years. And all of them, when they're healthy, when they're able to contribute for the full season, can be league-winning difference makers in your lineup.
Because Lamar got the extension with the Baltimore Ravens, I did move him up. I did have Lawrence ahead of him initially. But the next tier is really where we have our first real disagreement, I would say, because I view some of these players that are in this tier with Justin Fields, with Jamar Chase, and with Justin Jefferson as equally as valuable, because they're either high-end quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson or Kyler Murray, or they're the RB1 in fantasy and dynasty leagues with Bijan Robinson. I think market value would dictate that, Chase and Jefferson would go on the open market for those guys, but those are just personally how I value those players. And of course, when we're doing these kind of like 3 first rounders, is this player worth 2 first rounders kind of evaluation, we want to take into account A, what we value them as, and also B, what the market values them as, because we could sit here all day and say that I value Deshaun Watson for 3 first rounders. I don't think you would ever have to pay that for Deshaun Watson if you were actually going out and trying to acquire him, which kind of indicates that Deshaun Watson is a buy in our opinion. And that's what we're going to outline in the trade value chart on Flock Fantasy.
Yep, I agree there. I'll just quickly show my rankings as well to show the difference for me. I have so Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Justin Fields all a slight tier above. They're in the plus tier versus Watson, Murray, and Bijan being in the first rounders tier. The reason why I kind of got to that conclusion is that if you were to tell me that I would take, Justin Fields over Jefferson and Chase, okay, that's fine. I would take Jefferson over Chase and Fields, okay, that's fine. Or if I were to take Chase over Jefferson and Fields, I think that's fine. But I do think that if somebody were to say, oh, yeah, you're going to take Watson, Kyler, or Bijan over any of those three, I just can't envision myself doing that. So as a result, I do see that little mini tier. Similar to that I wouldn't take any three in this tier above Herbert, Lawrence, or Lamar Jackson personally. Again, on the open market, these are all going to be, in my opinion, top 12, top 13 level pieces in terms of trade value. But for me personally, I see a slight difference between that Jefferson, Chase, Fields versus the Watson, Murray, and Bijan.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair take to say that you wouldn't put them in the tier because you wouldn't take them ahead of those players. And I think for me, I value the tiers and the way that I did this as, how much are these guys worth on the open market? Not necessarily would I take Kyler Murray over Jamar Chase in a startup draft, because I probably wouldn't. I would probably take Chase above Kyler Murray, but I do think they're worth about the same in the eyes of the market and in my own opinion. So the next tier down, we have, another rookie and 2 more rookies that are going to find themselves into this tier. Bryce Young leading this tier, then with CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, and Anthony Richardson. Obviously, we have the tail end of the top 5 dynasty wide receivers with Lamb, AJ Brown, and Garrett Wilson. We have 2 more rookie quarterbacks who are basically like quarterback, 10 to 12 in dynasty, including Dak Prescott in that territory as well. These guys are all worth, 2 first rounders plus. In terms of rookie draft value, Bryce Young is our consensus 102. Anthony Richardson, our consensus 103. So even though they're listed as 2 first rounders plus, we're accounting for the fact that that's like a random first rounders, not necessarily, early first rounders or mid first rounders or whatever the case is.
Yep, no, agreed there. And for me personally, the only real difference is I have one extra name added to this. So for me, I have Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb leading this for me. The 2 rookie quarterbacks here with Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. 2 next wide receivers with AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson, similar to you. But I actually do have Chris Olave in this tier. I do think if I'm in a startup, am I willing to take him in the top 25? Absolutely. Like on the open market, I do think, like you kind of mentioned, Garrett Wilson would net more in a trade just based off the consensus on him. But I do think that their rookie seasons, in terms of a volume standpoint, in terms of a production standpoint, in terms of what they showcase as pure separators to potentially be wide receiver ones in the future, I think Chris Olave is everywhere there where what Garrett Wilson represented this year. So for me personally, I would have Chris Olave in this tier, but if you want to put him at the top of the next tier, I don't think that's really a big issue.
Yeah, so you have it closing out the top 20. I have it closing
Correct.
out my top 19, basically. But the next tier is kind of where we get into, I think, a little bit more discussion. Because I like you said, I have Olave in this tier. I think you could definitely argue him in the next tier above because he did show every, underlying peripheral of a potentially elite wide receiver in the future. CJ Stroud, who we believe is probably one of the more undervalued assets in Dynasty right now because I've seen a number of people take Jahmyr Gibbs over him. I've seen a number of people take JSN over him. Hell, I've seen Quentin Johnston go over him in some people's drafts. CJ Stroud, because he's a young quarterback, 21 years old, Houston Texans, 2nd overall draft capital, he's going to hold a lot of open market value. 2 first rounders is the tier that I have him listed. And then, of course, there's a huge cluster of wide receivers also in this tier, right? With Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, Drake London, and then also the other high-end dynasty running backs with Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall and Jahmyr Gibbs, and then Kyle Pitts, who's the dynasty tight end 1 in our opinion. So this tier of players is, again, like we're getting into like the 3rd round area of a startup. Late second, early 3rd round area of a startup. And I think you could really argue any one of these guys, depending on scoring format. Of course, if you're in a QB heavy room, you go with CJ Stroud. If you're in, maybe a bonus for running backs, maybe you'd go with the Jonathan Taylor, Breece Hall area. If you're in a tight end premium, maybe you go with Kyle Pitts. I think all these guys are kind of interchangeable and all these guys should net you 2 first rounders on the open market if you're looking to sell them. If somebody wanted to buy a Amon-Ra off of you, I would expect them to need to pay, 2 2024 firsts or a 2024 first and a 2025 first or something like that.
Yeah, no, I definitely can see it as well. For my rankings personally, again, it's pretty much the same. I have Chris Olave in the next year above, like we already mentioned. But the only real difference here, I believe, is I have T. Higgins off in the next list, and you have him here. Honestly, that's just my own personal preference. I think with London, with Waddle, with Amon or St. Brown, they all have higher projectable ceilings in terms of where their market value can reach. Whereas I think T. Higgins, well, I would take him, in the top 30 of a startup, and I'd be fine with him as my wide receiver too. I kind of have question marks as to how high the market can actually, raise on him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I'm not really, subscribing to the theory that because he's not the number one on his team that he can't still be a wide receiver
Fair.
one year over year consistently, just because we have such a high powered offense with Burrow, with
Agreed.
Chase, and with Higgins. And as long as Higgins gets extended by the Bengals, I don't expect that offense to break up anytime soon. So yeah, this tier again, a lot of fluidity, a lot of discussion that you could have. Maybe you wouldn't have Drake London in this tier. Maybe you'd have Jahmyr Gibbs a little higher. Maybe you'd have Jonathan Taylor a little higher. There's definitely argument to be had any which order of this place in this tier here. Then we get out to close out the top 36 with the final tier here, which I have listed as DK Metcalf, Devontae Smith, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Mark Andrews, and Travis Etienne. So I would assume a lot of people right now are probably wondering where the competitive pieces are, where Tyreek Hill, where Cooper Kupp, where Devontae Adams, where Stephon Diggs are in these rankings. This is a personal preference of mine and Danny's. We like to stay flexible early on in our startup drafts. So for me, I'm okay missing out on those tier of productive players like Tyreek Hill, like Diggs, like Devontae Adams, like Cooper Kupp. And even if you wanted to throw, Austin Eckler or any of the older running backs into that territory as well. So for me, I'm going to favor, younger assets over those guys unless they're giving me an elite advantage like Christian McCaffrey would be giving me at running back. So I'll let you talk about your ranking of this tier and kind of that discussion point as well, because I'm assuming a lot of people, if they're more redraft centric players, are going to gear towards, a Stephon Diggs over, let's say, a Travis Etienne in this area.
Yeah, I agree. And for me personally, the only differences in my rankings versus yours is that you have Saquon Barkley and Travis Etienne on, and I have the two vet receivers that you kind of mentioned with Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs. But aside from that, I already mentioned T. Higgins kind of being in this tier. He's someone that I want on my Dynasty League teams. He's just someone I worried about that if I were to have to rebuild and I would sell, I wouldn't necessarily get the value I'd be looking for him. So that's the only discrepancy I have there. Devontae Smith, some very similar situation to him and T. Higgins, 24, 25-year-old guys, high-powered offenses, but the dynasty value, in my opinion, is kind of capped based on the situation there. Christian McCaffrey, I think he's the one vet running back for me personally, given the ceiling that we have seen even in the San Francisco offense last year, despite splitting touches with Elijah Mitchell. He showed he can still be this 20-plus PPR point per game scorer that I have question marks really across the rest of the entire running back landscape amongst the guys that we haven't already mentioned. Mark Andrews, we know what he is. When he's fully healthy, he is the clear-cut number one weapon for Lamar Jackson, and in my opinion, the clear-cut tight end 2 in Dynasty. DK Metcalf, again, it's a little bit tough with him because talent-wise, I think you can argue him with the tier above. But the question marks I have just simply come to what exactly we've seen from him in the last couple of years. Again, if he has a wide receiver 5 overall season, I absolutely think he can jump back up into maybe like this year. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the tier above. But for now, I think he has to be valued here. His teammate JSN coming in is one of the reasons why as well, because I do think JSN coming in is going to limit the overall target ceiling DK Metcalf can see, just based off the role that JSN has showed both at Ohio State and where he projects to be going into the next level. And then finally, like you said, 2 win now wide receivers. I just prefer them personally, especially in redraft, to a guy like Saquon Barkley, to any other of the vet running backs in this range. And because they're wide receivers, I'm going to have them ranked higher. So for me personally, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs. But like you kind of mentioned, if you want to have Etienne and Barkley here, I don't really think there's a huge discrepancy. And in fact, if we were to extend this list to top 50, I would assume both of them or all of them would be in the same mid first rounder plus tier.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other guys missing in this area that you could probably argue are other quarterbacks. Once CJ Stroud comes off the board, you have a real argument, depending on your league format, depending on what room you're in. If you're in a 2 quarterback league and everybody's, snatching up quarterbacks, you're going to see, Daniel Jones go off the board. You're going to see potentially Will Levis come off the board. You're going to see potentially Trey Lance come off the board. You're going to see Tua Tagovailoa come off the board. Guys like that are probably going to fit into the like 4th round startup area. of QB heavy rooms. Whereas if you're in not a QB heavy room, they're probably going to fall to like the 5th, 6th round area, like you kind of said. And also, like we didn't talk about yet, the other vet wide receivers, Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp. Also, from a production standpoint, if you went, let's say, in the 1st round and you grab Lamar Jackson, in the 2nd round, you come back around, you grab Dak Prescott, you have two contending piece type of quarterbacks. And then in the 3rd round, maybe you grab Jonathan Taylor because you're trying to make a competitive window. I wouldn't be shocked or argue it whatsoever if in the 4th round you wanted to take Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, somebody like that. That's going to help you win. It really all depends how you're building out your team. We can't really give one size fits all fantasy advice and dynasty advice because it all depends on the strategy that you're employing in your startup.
Exactly. I'm glad you mentioned this. For those of you now, where's Travis Kelce? Where's, Cooper Kupp? These guys should be on this list. Yeah, like if you're in a dynasty league and you're in a contending window and you want to value those guys in the top 36, I'm not going to argue that. This is more so a projection where you're in a startup right now. Where would the top 36 kind of align? And I do think, given the age, given the potential volatility on the market of a guy like Travis Kelce, I wouldn't personally be willing to take him in the top 36, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's more of blanket statement right now. Like as a
Yeah.
general rule, we like to go young in startups, so we set our dynasty rankings to go young in startups. But if your room is, overvaluing youth and you can get values on Travis Kelce, you can get values on Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams, whatever, then you can definitely pivot your approach to that extent. But what we don't want to do is just draft like a redraft team, right? We do want to factor in dynasty value on the open market, which is why we have these tiers listed as like their 1st round, 2nd round, 3rd round, pick value and that kind of stuff. And we also want to factor in longevity as well, because, you're probably only going to have a guy like Travis Kelce for 1 to 2 years max. And at that point, I can't draft that guy, with the 27th overall pick in a startup. I need to draft players on my team before I get to Travis Kelce that have longevity that can help me in the future as well as in the present if I'm going more of a contending type of build.
Agreed.
Yeah, so this was a pretty short video. We didn't want to necessarily go super in depth with these players. We kind of want to just give you an overview of the landscape of the top 36 in our rankings. We will, as I mentioned, break down position by position our top 12s, probably top 15s potentially for the onesie positions in tier maker format as well. But in those videos, we will go more in depth on, what their market value is. Are they a buy? Are they a sell? How does the landscape shake out? Just real quick just before we get out of here, is there anybody on this list that you think is undervalued relative to what we have them listed in terms of market value? For me, like I already kind of talked about, Deshaun Watson, Kyler Murray, and Bijan Robinson, I view as valuable as Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Justin Fields, even though the market would disagree and probably would put them more in line with how you value them. So for me, those 3 players are marketably more valuable than what the market is currently outlining. And I also mentioned CJ Stroud as somebody that I think is undervalued on the market as well.
Yeah, I'll say out of this list, the guy that really speaks to me in terms of where we value him versus where I think the consensus might be drier on him is Drake London. Because we saw personally, like from what we do, from what we're able to research, all of the volume stats, all of the peripherals in context of his offense, that makes us very high on him. But for the casual consumer, they might just see, Olave, Wilson, Watson, all these guys were way better than him as a rookie. And Drake London, he's going to be a bust because, people are pushing propaganda all the time because they look at the box scores. They don't actually look at just how involved he was on his offense. So I think personally in a lot more casual leagues, Drake London's going to at least be in a tier with, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, et cetera there. And I do think in a lot of leagues, you could be seeing him valued more so as like the wide receiver 17 on the market versus where we have him, as a clear-cut top 10, top 8 overall guy.
Yeah, exactly. Drake London also makes a lot of sense. And I mean, the same can be said for his teammate, Kyle Pitts, who many people I've seen like put out the take that he's been disappointing or that tight ends, if Kyle Pitts didn't work out as a rookie tight end or as an early young tight end, then why are we going to believe in this year's tight end class? Like I would call setting the rookie receiving record for tight ends working out in the NFL. He got injured last year. He played on a run heavy offense with Marcus Mariota, who's washed and over the hill. For me, Kyle Pitts also screams out as, especially in tight end premium formats, a huge buy right now. And 2 first rounders was significantly less than you were paying for him last year. And realistically, I mean, yeah, his outlook has soured a little bit in terms of liquidity and tradability side of things, but he's still the same player. He's still the same projection to be the clear-cut dynasty tight end one, a guy that could absolutely finish as a top 3, top 1 tight end in redraft this year. And if that happens, he's going to vault himself all the way up, probably into the first round of most startups, especially in tight end premium formats. So don't forget about Kyle Pitts. If you're picking at the 101 or the 102 and you can pair Mahomes or Allen or one of those elite positional advantages with Kyle Pitts, another elite positional advantage, and build out the rest of your roster throughout the remaining rounds, I think it's an excellent strategy. And it's one that I actually took in a startup that I did late in the season where I paired Mahomes and Kyle Pitts together.
Yeah, no, I like what you're able to do there. The question I got posed for you is, out of the current, top 36 open market type of players, maybe even someone we don't have on this list, who do you think is one of the more quote unquote overrated or overpriced players on the market?
So based on the guys that we have listed here, I think some of the players that are going a little too high for where I value them are probably the running back 2 and 3, Jonathan Taylor and Breece Hall. I think
Agreed.
consistently you see Breece Hall go in the second round. I'm a little bit more comfortable with him in the third round, given that he's coming off of the injury. And we might have a shortened second season or a lackluster second season production-wise from him. And also the fact that if he looks bad, he's going to lose value pretty quickly because he is a running back, even though we know that he probably should look a little bad coming off of an ACL tear. So, I mean, that's a market difference that our audience is well documented as knowing that we don't really like drafting running backs early to begin with, but let alone when we're taking them over potentially, young franchise quarterbacks like Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. I would say most of the time those running backs are going at or above those quarterbacks in drafts. Same goes with even Dak Prescott. I think sometimes he goes behind those guys as well, given the fact that he's 30 years old now.
Which is pretty crazy. Also, I mean, that was going to be my answer as well. Honestly, running back 2 to like 6, I don't feel comfortable taking like the JT, the Breece Hall, even the Gibbs. I don't feel comfortable taking them in the late second, early third round area. And in terms of like the Barkley, McCaffrey, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking them. ETN, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking them to like the mid fourth, or not the mid fourth, like the late third type of area. So that's the only real discrepancy that we have in comparison to the market. Some people are going to be more willing to take those running backs higher in their startups.
Yeah, and I think part of that difference comes from the fact that me and you play in a lot of quarterback-heavy rooms,
Yeah.
so quarterbacks push those players down most of the time. But if you don't play in a quarterback-heavy room, and I've seen people get Deshaun Watson at the end of the third round in some drafts because their league isn't properly market valuing quarterbacks, then yeah, those running backs are probably going to get pushed up the board as a result of that. Same with the other wide receivers as well. So that was the top 36 Superflex rankings. Unless Danny has anything else to add, I think we could probably get out of here. If you guys enjoyed, again, this was an overview type of video, market value. How do we value these guys on the open market and also in startups? This was not necessarily player takes related. It was more so a macro-based video showing you guys our top 36 Superflex rankings and kind of seeing the differences between how we value players versus how maybe you value players or how your league values players and that kind of thing. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. If this is the first time you're checking us out, hit the subscribe button down below. And also, we will have a trade value chart. So you know exactly, we give you basically how much our top 36 are valued. And we're going to give you them, in the positional videos as well. But if you want to know, player X, who's like wide receiver 37 in our rankings, what is he valued for on the open market? That will be in the trade value chart articles that are coming over the next week or so. So definitely stay tuned for that. And those are available on flockfantasy.com. And using the promo code FSE, you can get a 2-day free trial to check out those articles for free before you sign up and buy anything. And also 30% off of any of the packages if you like what you see and you want to make a purchase over there on Flock Fantasy. You'll get our content, Mason over at Fantasy Flocks content, Zach and Badake over at Dynasty Lands content, and then also Pierre and Chris over at Endgames content. We have paired up and teamed up to bring you guys a great site that is more valuable than any of us could offer on our own. And we're really pumped, really excited about what we have coming in the future on that site. So definitely check that out. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.